Hello, everyone. I'm so excited for my guest today, Ashani Dunwell. Ashani, will you introduce yourself to everyone?
Yes. Hey guys, I am Ashani. I am an astrologer and tarot intuitive reader. I've been doing it for probably over a decade at this point, and I'm just working individually with clients. I have a large following on X, which is primarily where people can find me. But yeah, I just like share horoscopes. I do one-on-one consultations and have a clientele base that I've been working with for some time.
That is fascinating. Thank you so much. So let's get into it. Our topic today is the houses of your 30s, right? Like where your next level gets built. And so I want to start simple. We're going to be covering perfection years in this audio in this video. What are perfection years for people who don't know, and why should someone that's in this rebuilding phase, that's in this phase where Saturn's kind of turned their life upside down, why should they care about them?
Yeah, absolutely. I personally love working with Profection years just because I think that they give us a really good framework as to like where we're currently at in our life. So when it comes to like, why am I experiencing this? Why do these themes keep popping up in our life? That's where you can turn to Profection years. Profection years traditionally are a Hellenistic timekeeping practice that help us to track each year of our life from the moment that we come into the world. So if you look at a Profection year map, you're going to see those years aligned with the houses, starting with year zero, which is going to be our first house year, and so forth. And so each of those years really give us like fundamental themes that we need to focus on and kind of integrate in our lives. And so, as someone who loves to like analyze and constantly be thinking of different ways that I can improve my own circumstances, I think Profection years do a really good job of helping us with that framework.
Yeah, you mentioned some delicious topics I love, like no understanding the themes of your life and the themes of the era that you're in, timekeeping as well, because we are beings that are, beholden to time. And so sometimes I hear a lot from my late 20s, early 30s clients, they feel like they're running out of time. Like I hear that phrase a
Yes.
lot. And so timekeeping and understanding what you're supposed to be focusing on is so powerful with perfection years. I want to ask you, what's the difference between just surviving the perfection year kind of deal versus actively working with that theme of your life in that time of your life?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's why I emphasize using them so much because it is about actively working with those themes. And so what I think is the difference between surviving and actually like thriving in your perfection year is not allowing those themes to happen to you, but anticipating them. And so that's why we do perfection year readings. That's why we have the perfection year like map. We can kind of like pay attention to the next decade of our lives if we want to. If you're type A, you can really sit there and map it out and consider those themes. And the Profection year has a time lord. So you're going to look at it's like the ruler of that house. And so you're going to look at the ruler of that house where it lands in your chart, and you're going to kind of like build a relationship with that planet and understand how that planet works through you and what it's inspiring you to do or calling you to do in your lifetime, because perfection years are cyclical. So you're going to return back to those years at some point in your life. And it's an opportunity of reflection and like building off of what you've learned. So I think that's really where it's not about survival so much as it's about like that progress and like really making the most of your circumstances.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love the words you use there, inspired and called, right? Like that's one of the things I try to impress on my clients is perfection years are an invitation, right?
Yeah.
But you also mentioned so beautifully that they build on each other. And so
Yeah.
you can't do second housework without having first done first
Having
housework.
to reflect on that first house.
Yes, yeah, and then 12th house and how important that is for first house, right? So we always want to get into the sexy houses, right? Like the first house, the seventh house, right?
Yes.
But the sixth house and the 12th house work is so important. It's the foundation, right? The bedrock of those houses. So I love how you put that. So let's get into the nitty-gritty. Let's talk about what the actual houses are, right? So let's
Yes.
start at 30. That's a seventh house year. And this is all
Yes.
about relationships and partnerships for someone rebuilding post Saturn return, because that's a place that Saturn hits pretty consistently, is these like relationships that have been holding on by a thread and holding on because
Exactly.
you're in survival mode. So what does seventh house years typically bring up for people?
Yeah, I feel like that 37th house year really comes to show you how much you've learned about yourself and how that pertains to your relationships moving forward. Because even coming after a sixth house year being about our productivity, our responsibility, service, I call it the work life balance house, like what you need to give to others, but also what you're giving to yourself. And so once we learn about that, it's really pushing us to say, okay, now how does that apply to our relationships? How when I show up in new ways and more balanced ways, is that going to directly affect, the people that the people that I attract into my life, things of that nature, and who I am building with and what feels sustainable to build with. It's kind of about realizing that you don't relate how you used to. And so seeking out those new connections, those new partnerships, and also just the things you resonate with. I feel that a lot of people love to like focus on marriage and, partnerships and people when it comes to the seventh house, but sometimes the seventh house is also, mentalities or lifestyles or other things that you need to adopt. It's about commitment at the end of the day. So those contracts can be spiritual contracts as well. They can be emotional contracts, karmic contracts. They don't always have to be like relational. And so I think that's one thing to keep in mind. The seventh house is really about what am I committing myself to now that I've learned these things about myself and about what I have to offer the world as well.
Love that. And it goes along with something that I say, and this is very Aquarian of me, right? But I say, like, if it doesn't work for everybody, then it doesn't work for anybody, right? And so
Yeah,
we, like you were saying, we get hyper focused on marriage and relationships and romance. But we know that there are that sexuality and romanticism is a spectrum. And there are people that are
absolutely.
asexual. There are people that are aromantic, right?
Yeah,
And so
they're gonna
we
say I never want to get married. So how does the seventh house apply to me?
Right, right. And so I love how you broadened it and like scooped everybody up and like know that any commitment, any contracts, any relationships that you choose, right? So platonic, friendships, all of that beautiful stuff is wrapped up in the seventh. I love that. And you also mentioned balancing things like balancing relationships. That can be a big
Yeah,
lesson in that year. And it's also the seventh house is traditionally ruled by Libra, and Libra is the scale.
absolutely.
Yeah. And so I
Yes,
love
you were being ruled by the scales. Obviously, the seventh house holding the descendant, being opposite the ascendant, that relationship with self versus others is naturally going to come up in a seventh house profection year.
yes, yes. And the you mentioned magnetism, right? And one thing I always like to remind people of is to be magnetic, you have to be polarizing. And so it's also,
Absolutely.
it's also the energy of who are you pushing away in this year too, and that can be the hard part. So,
What do you no longer resonate with? What are you canceling, per se,
mhm. Yes, beautifully put, beautifully put. Okay, so let's move on to 31. This is an eighth house year. So we're talking,
Yes, that's year I'm in. Oh my gosh, pray for
oh,
me.
I was okay. I will say you survived it, right? I survived
Yes, I'm
mine.
one
Like,
month away from my, ninth house year. Let's go.
yay. Okay, so we're talking like transformations and shared resources, other people's stuff, the psychological places that you try to hide from, right? The waters that you kind of wade in that you didn't know they were that deep, right? And you didn't know they were that
Yeah.
deep till you're in them. And so this can feel really intense. How do you navigate it without it becoming a destruction year?
Absolutely. And I love how you put, those waters that you have to navigate, you don't realize how deep they are. I immediately thought like it's gonna get you. Like it makes me think of the stuff that's hiding in those waters, that murky energy. Even an eighth house year being like a water, associated year, being associated with Scorpio, it is one of those years that's about that like psychological transformation when you start to uncover those things that were repressed, that were hidden underneath. And I think with it being pertaining to like other people's things and energy and space, even it shows that when you do like merge with someone or share or commit to someone coming off of that seventh house year energy, what that brings into your life and how that also changes you. I think of how the seventh house leads into the eighth house. And so, with the seventh house being about those contracts and partnerships, the eighth house makes me think of like no longer being one, but like becoming kind of like an entity or how something then changes and transforms you through a process of coming together or integrating something, even spiritually within yourself. And so eighth house years are can be extremely intense. I think that they, for a lot of people, feel like disorienting, they can feel like a lot of loss and things like that. But I think if you're willing to accept and embrace like what you know needs to be removed from your life or addressed in your life, if you're not actively running from those things that you do need to face, I think an eighth house year can be extremely liberating. And that's really what eighth house years can be about as well. Alchemy, I call myself Ashani the alchemist. And I think eighth house years very much speak to alchemy, transmutation, and like, spiritual liberation. And so when you are able to merge with the things that are positive, because I think eighth house gets a lot of like fear mongering and like negative associations, but it's also the house of spiritual liberation. And so I think that when you are able to integrate things that are healthy mentalities, relationships, dynamics, just different energies in your life that are going to support you because it is opposite the second house, that's when you see that change and you see that liberation in your life. So the eighth house is a very important year, in my opinion. I think it's an extremely, what is the word, fundamental year in terms of like what you are trying to change and actively outgrow in your life.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You mentioned so much good stuff there. The merging, I think that can feel a little bit off, especially to people that are coming out of this seventh house energy and they're like, maybe their seventh house energy was a whirlwind and they had this like whirlwind romance, or this whirlwind situation where they made this commitment and then it becomes their entire life. And then it's like, what does that cost you? So I really feel like a word that I associate with eighth house energy is the cost. Eighth house really makes whatever you're doing, the cost of it very evident. And it kind of asks you, are you willing to pay this? Like, here's what this life costs.
Right,
Are you
right.
willing to pay this?
Traditionally, with the eighth house being like associated with taxes and
Yep.
debt, like it is
Mhm.
those karmic debts.
Yes. Yeah. And so, and thinking about the concept of taxes, like taxes are what wealth costs, right? I could get on a soapbox about rich people paying their taxes, but I won't. But, but yeah, taxes are what society costs to have a civilized society. You need to fund it. And so I love the alchemy tie in too, because there are connotations of alchemy with the eighth house and how your emotions, you can do emotional alchemy. Okay. So now let's move on to this 32, the ninth house. So when you're in a ninth house year, it's about higher learning, expansion, philosophy, your belief system. For someone who feels behind in their life, how do they use this year to shift their perspective, to maybe catch up, right? Or to just expand their worldview?
Absolutely. House years. I'm excited about my ninth house year, especially being just a month out from it, less than a month at this point. But ninth house years are really about learning, in my opinion, and discovery. So, when it comes to what you mentioned about feeling maybe
Right.
behind or feeling the need to catch up or gain more insight, that's what I think becomes emphasized in the ninth house year. And that's another thing I will say is as you enter these profection years, I feel that you do start to feel more pressure in these areas of life. So a ninth house year is going to start to make you feel like, oh, what else do I need to learn? Where else can I gain more information? Because you can start to realize where you are lacking insight, where your perspective is limited. And so it's about seeking out that information, that wisdom through new experiences, through new philosophies, through like reading and education and things of that nature. And so I think that leaning into, something you've been wanting to learn, I think that gaining new credentials or like skill building is a great thing to do in a ninth house year. But ninth house years feel very active to me, especially coming out of an eighth house year that feels so introspective and almost psychological. It's very mental and emotional. I think ninth house years help to break free of that and then say, how can I put what I've learned into practice? How can I go out and really like co-create with the world, through learning, through new experiences, through connecting with different walks of life. The ninth house is associated with astrology, for instance. It's associated with travel. It's associated with foreign affairs and different cultures. And so being open to those things as we have released, the eighth house being associated with loss, as we've released and like ended certain cycles, as we've let go of certain aspects of our identity in that eighth house year because we have merged these new things, because we have transformed. So that ninth house is about now going out and seeking what resonates, and seeking out new insight and information to kind of build our worldview and create a new understanding of who we're becoming. So
1000%. I feel like that's the keyword. That's a great keyword for the ninth house is worldview. And I remember, I don't know if you watched the show Insecure with Issa Rae
oh, I
on
love it. One of my
I
things.
love that show. And so when I think it's like the first season and she was like taking the like underprivileged kids to the beach because they said that they had like never been to the beach. They
Yes.
lived in LA. And to me, that's such a great example of like a ninth house thing. Like going to if you live 30 minutes away from a place which you're like I've always wanted to go and then going, that's something that can really expand your worldview, or traveling out of the country like you said, ninth house
Yes.
travel, ruling travel. So just going to see how somebody else lives,
Absolutely.
that can be in your own city, that can be in a city over, that can be in a country over, like wherever, but just expanding that worldview. I love the way you put that. Okay,
I
let's
agree
talk.
with that. I like how you said that, like seeing how someone else lives, especially with the ninth house being associated with like Jupiter, Sagittarius energy. I think it is all about like gaining more information, wanting to know more about the world and how it works and why we are the way we are.
Yeah, 1000%. Yeah. So this is my personal favorite year that I've been through so far. I'm 35, so I'm halfway through, but this is my personal favorite year that I've been through in my 30s, the 10th house year at 33. So this is a year about your career, your reputation, your legacy, public image. What do you want to be known for? And this can really feel like a make it or break it year professionally, especially for people who may have, like me, strong Capricorn placements where they
Yeah.
just put a lot of pressure on themselves, maybe strong Virgo placements as well. So, how do you approach this year strategically, especially when you feel behind or you feel like this isn't what I want to be doing? How do you alchemize the energy of this year in a strategic way?
Yeah, absolutely. When I think of the 10th house, I don't know if you've ever heard of terms like ikigai. It makes me think of coming to an understanding of what your core values are or what your why is. Like even with my clients, sometimes we discuss like what is your why in terms of like when people come to me and ask like what is my purpose or what in my chart may indicate certain gifts, I like to emphasize that while the 10th house is traditionally like associated with ambition and our goals, and like you said, that like pressure to build something greater than ourselves or greater than what we have been able to experience thus far, especially coming out of the ninth house. If you travel the world, you come back home and you're like, wait, like there's more, out there for me. And so that's that 10th house energy. So asking yourself sometimes, especially because those perfection years are so cyclical, you might come to this 10th house year and say, I'm actually not happy with what I've built thus far. I actually hate my career. I actually don't love like, my social groups. I don't feel like I belong. I don't feel, like people really see what I'm capable of. And so it's to me about redefining or simply defining what it is you value, what it is you do want to be known for, and what it is you're truly striving for. That can change at any point, but I think knowing your why is going to help you to constantly like stay on track and be able to see that consistent progress in your life and actually truly feel fulfilled in that progress. Because so many people, especially, in modern times, like we work because we have to. We work because it's a means to an end, but not because we truly feel passionate or strongly about whatever field or career that we might pursue. And so do you see the shift taking place right now even? And I think Pluto and Aquarius has a lot to do with that. We can get into that another time, but I think the shift taking place is more people wanting to work for themselves, more people wanting to do something that they truly feel passionate about, that aligns with their natural gifts and their calling in this lifetime. And that to me is indicative of the 10th house. What is your calling? What is your why? And how can you show up in representing that in everything that you do. So whether you are an entrepreneur or you work in a specific field, I think the 10th house is like what people know you for, the impact that you leave on this world and like how that contributes to your legacy. So whenever my clients do come to me and they or like, I'm questioning things, or I want to change my career, or I don't feel satisfied, I always go back to, well, what do you value? Even for me, and we can get into that another time as well, but I often talk about how the second, the sixth house, and the 10th house are like the foundational houses or the career houses.
Mm.
And so it is going to be an extension of that second house, which is, our value systems and things like that. So the 10th house is just really those value systems elevated and integrated into our actual, ambitions and the things that we create in this world. And so that's what I think the 10th house is. And I think psychologically, to reframe it that way and to say, okay, well, what do I really value? What am I really striving for? How do I define success outside of what everyone else wants for me or thinks is correct? That is what keeps that fulfillment and keeps us going.
Oh, I love that. I feel like I'm saying that for all your answers, but truly I do. The idea of defining your own definition of success. Like this
Yeah.
is really, and that's why again, like you said, the ninth house work is so important because if you feel stuck or you feel sometimes depression can come in because all you've seen is what you've seen. All you've seen
Yeah.
is generations of people doing the same thing over and over. And you know in your heart that you don't want that for yourself, but you're just
And you
like,
feel so strongly that there's something else calling
yes.
toward you.
And but you're like, I don't know how to get it for myself. That's what the ninth house year is supposed to do for you is show you other people who have done it. How did they do it? And then you dissect that and decide, okay, well, this is how I'm going to do it. And then the 10th house year sets that up. And so, but it's so important to expand your horizons and like you said, define success for yourself. So I love the
Yes.
way you put that and like know your why. And also I want to add that it's never too late. My birthday's in January and I was in October when I started posting on social media, like as an astrologer full out. And it went crazy for those 2 months. Like I
Yeah.
was then I had to go back and do like eighth house work, sixth house work. I had to work on my
Right. And
nervous
kind of build
system.
that foundation.
Yes,
Yep.
yeah, because I had been just kind of skipping through those years kind of passively. And so sometimes the good things that happen that we want are the things that show us, oh crap, my sixth house is weak, my
Yeah,
fourth house is
that's where the
weak.
shadow work comes in. That's where that rebuilding comes in. And one thing I want to say with us speaking on this is that the 10th house is an angular house. So, it is one of those really transformative years. I think it is fundamental for our becoming. And I think that 10th house year shows the opposition to that fourth house year when it comes to those things we do need to dismantle, where we've come from. It even shows the gifts that we may inherit, the things that why we're called to do the things that we do, but how we can take that to a new level. And so I think that's super important to keep in mind because, with you talking about that building and that having to go back sometimes, if you think about generational patterns and inner child healing and all of the things that we talk about in order to make progress in our life and to reach fulfillment, it really represents that opposition from the fourth house to the 10th house.
Yeah, 1000%. Okay, so let's go into the 11th house year at 34. And the 11th house is about community, your hopes, your dreams, groups, your network. So, how does this year help someone who is rebuilding, who might feel alone? Because we do have an epidemic of loneliness in this country, even though we're more connected than we've ever been, which is so bizarre. But someone who has a lot of parasocial relationships but still feels alone, how can they start connecting and magnetizing their tribe during this year?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's ironic that, just going back to the beginning of our 30 profection years, it starts at the seventh house. And then midway in, we're kind of like reaching that 11th house year where we are reassessing our relationships and how we relate to others. Um, especially as it pertains to those commitments or even the things that we feel that we have to commit to. And so the 11th house, it leans more toward, well, yes, we may have to commit to these things. Yes, we may have certain goals we're trying to achieve, but what are your hopes and dreams? What are you really hoping to feel and to get out of this? And I feel that the 11th house is also, where do you belong? That sense of belonging and who you want there with you when you achieve your goals and who's going to help you get there and who's going to, be alongside you. And so it is friendships, it is your networks, it is community and all of those things. And the 11th house, I feel like the 11th house gives me the warm and fuzzies. Like it really can be a good year. Obviously, if you have malefics or if you have other like challenging aspects, that's where the like loneliness or like that like black sheep energy can come in. But it's still a house that allows you to find your people, to find your soul tribe. Everyone has someone, everyone has
Mhm.
someone to relate to. And I think but that 11th house year can remind us of that, to go out and to find your people, to put yourself out there as well, to show what you have to also contribute to your communities and the people that you do want to relate to. And so it is going to be sharing our gifts and sharing, our outlook on the world so that we can attract those people who kind of are like-minded and who we can build with and grow with and who can, I feel, support the person that we're trying to become. You know what I mean? Support those things that we're trying to achieve in life. And so there's a lot of beauty, in my opinion, that comes from the 11th house, a lot of like fulfillment that is possible when tapping into the 11th house. And so 11th house years, I think, especially after that 10th house year, helps us to come into understanding of like what we really value, what we really want and are striving toward. Now it's about like who are we bringing along, and who can we seek out to build those things. When I think of like the 11th house, I think of link and build, and that networking and connecting with others and finding people who you can collaborate with and things like that. So it can be a fun year. I think it could be a very social year, and it can be a year full of like recognition and like building credibility, amongst your communities as well.
And you mentioned revelations and like, or you mentioned, sorry, everyone has someone. And I think what it made me think about was that in that opposition to the fifth house, it can sometimes show you those people that are not meant for you, that don't really bring you joy,
Absolutely.
that don't support you. And so I think, of course, our brains are wired for the negativity bias, right? We don't necessarily
Yeah.
think about the people that are rallying around us, where our brain will point out the people that are like naysaying and just
Yeah, the
don't believe in us.
haters and
Yeah.
those things. And you are right, and I'm glad that you mentioned that. I do feel like sometimes I try to, ironically, we won't go there, but I try to have a balanced, you know, um, perspective when it comes to the houses, just because I
Mhm.
try to avoid fear mongering, of course, and I try to be constructive. But it is common that when you are dealing with an 11th house year, any year that deals with those like that socializing and having to connect with others, other people, unfortunately, as humans, we are flawed. And so you're going to deal with that feeling of not belonging, the opposite of what I said, the haters, the naysayers, like you said, the non supporters, the girls who don't get it. You know what I mean? And so
Yeah.
I feel like the 11th house year is also one of those years where the perfect mantra would be the girls that get it, because
Hmm.
it helps you to find where you truly belong. And sometimes that means falling out with people. Sometimes that means leaving an industry that you've been a part of for 20 years. Sometimes that means, cutting off your best friend because you realize that can't trust them, or that maybe you are outgrowing someone in your life, because you guys have different priorities or values or goals at this point. And those things can be bittersweet. So I said, oh, the warm and fuzzies and all the good stuff that comes with the 11th house. But at times it can definitely feel bittersweet. But that's why it's still sweet, because it's still
Hmm.
showing progress. It's still showing new possibility. I think we can all say it's exciting to connect with new people and to have those moments where your people are finishing your sentences and just understand where you're coming from. You're like, how does a stranger know what I've been through and completely understand me? And those things can come, those divine encounters can come from the 11th house as well.
Yeah, yeah, and everything that shines light casts a shadow, right? And so we have to, that's part of the duality of this life, of the rules of earth. We have to understand that there's the good things, the bad things give dimension to the good things, you know? And so that was my experience. That's a year that I just came off of, and so that was kind of my experience of it really being loud, these people that you have to like perform for, or they expect a certain version of you, or they expect you to
Yes.
do things without checking in with you and saying, "Hey, are you available for this? How do you feel? How was
Yes.
your day? How was your week?" They don't do that. They're just like, "Hey, I need you to XYZ." That was very loud for me. And also the people who didn't understand what I do and didn't try to understand it. They didn't try to, like, I could speak their language, I could speak about their niche and what they had going
Yeah,
on.
trying to relate to them, but maybe that wasn't
Mhm.
reciprocated. negative.
Exactly. Yeah, but they couldn't speak mine, and it just started to really chafe me. And I will say with all of these years, it's not this like one big thing that there's like a lightning strike and then you realize what you're supposed to do. It's a slow grind. I mean, you have 365 days, so it's a little bit of a chafe. It's a friction that you start to feel, and it
Yeah,
gets
it is.
louder and louder and louder. So I don't want anybody to come away scared
Right,
because
right.
it's a slow process, and it's always, like I said, an invitation.
And one
So
thing that I've observed about profection years is that toward the beginning of the profection year, you may notice these themes start trickling into your life. Even toward the end of that previous profection year, you're going to start to see these themes come up in your life. And you may initially kind of feel like, why is this happening? Or this feels uncomfortable, or this is unfair, even. But then I think toward the end, that's when you start to like understand the why and understand the lesson and how it happening has transformed you, helped you grow, or matured your perspective in some way. And so I think it, like you said, it's a process. You know what I mean? Like it comes with its ebbs and flows, and sometimes it can be uncomfortable. But I think it also comes with a lot of growth and like perspective that walking away from the perfection year, we're only going to feel like stronger, or like we're going to have more clarity.
1000%, yes. So let's talk about 35. That's where I am currently.
Dun, dun, dun.
Right? Cue the music. Yes, exactly. So 12th house is all about endings and your spirituality, what's hidden, what's holding you back, things that live in your subconscious that have a lot stronger of a hold than you think. Right. And so how well, what's the difference between something getting cleared away and something getting revealed? Like, talk about those energies and how do you work with those energies consciously?
Absolutely. So one thing I actually want to say, since we just spoke on the 11th house here and we talked about how that can bring up, in a way, a loss of identity, like you no longer resonate with the people that you once resonated with, that to me has always felt like an extension of the 12th house, or like a preparation rather of that 12th house year. Because for me, once you move into the 12th house, it's about like dismantling these things that you're realizing you're still holding on to. And so I talked a lot about connecting with new people and building with people and networking and realizing the people who resonate with you in that 11th house year. But I feel like that also shows us or brings up where, yes, we may have changed. Yes, we've may entered new environments and new relationships, but subconsciously, have we truly changed? Have we truly been able to work through certain, paradigms or certain subconscious belief systems? And so moving into the 12th house, that's brought up. Yes, we may have changed externally, but now it's about that internal change to help integrate the entire process. And then the 12th house also can be seen as like the year before emergence again, the year like, it's the womb. If you're a baby and you're, going to come out of your mother or whoever, it really is about that emergence and that like rebirth. So it does make me think of what am I still holding on to? What's still lingering in my consciousness? What am I still unaware that I may be attached to, in order to, and addressing those things in order to fully liberate ourselves, in order to fully like integrate these new relationships, these new ambitions, these new realizations that we've had as we've gone through the entire cycle. And so 12th house years can, they can feel so scary the way that we talk about them, even as astrologers. Sometimes I'm sure our clients or followers are like, okay, but how do I prepare? But I think the 12th house can also be very liberating. I think it can really show you how far you've come. And I think that it can be uncomfortable when you are running from or trying to hide from those things that come up, that show you, when you're able to face your fears, when you're able to face your weaknesses or your self-sabotaging tendencies, or the ways that you might avoid or deny or deflect at times. Like when you are willing to say, yeah, I do that. And sometimes it's not so healthy, and actually work through those things. I think that is when the 12th house can be like the house of healing, the house of liberation. And it is a very psychological house. So it's related to our mental health when we talk about these things, when we share them with others, when we bring them out into the light. that is what transmutes that 12th house energy. And I feel that our, even spiritual gifts can be reflected in the 12th house. So someone like me, my Mars is in the 12th house, and like doing what I do for a living, I feel that that is very indicative of being a 12th house Mars. And so, just kind of existing in the spiritual realm and being able to like communicate and just like understand these concepts on a high level, that collective energy ultimately that is represented in the 12th house. And so the 12th house also being the last house, it does show all of those lessons we've learned, all of those cycles we went through, how they have impacted us and how they've been absorbed in our character and in our nature and our behaviors and our perception ultimately. And so it is about like who you've become, but like also who you're about to become, because then we get to enter our first house here and it's about that redefining, like I said, that rebirth phase. So a lot of like death or endings or loss can be associated with the 12th house. But again, we always have to make room for the new. We always, have to let go of things. That whole process is very cyclical and it really inevitable. And I think that that's what the 12th house is also showing us, that you can only deny these things for so long. And when you do, they come out in ways that we don't always catch and are able to see.
Yes. And I think, if I had to summarize the 12th house, it would be like, this is the house where you increase your capacity, And so for when I
Yes.
was first learning astrology, I had such a hard time linking Pisces to the 12th house and like Neptune. I was like, I don't know. I feel like Pisces is a softer energy than what the 12th house like brings. But then I thought about, I had an amazing teacher that basically said, what think about if you're on a life raft and you're sinking, right? Your life raft is sinking because you have so much stuff on it. It's like
Yeah.
that's 12th house energy of what you're being kind of indiscriminate about. I have to not let this raft sink. So what needs to go, right?
What do I need
And
to sacrifice, let go of, cut away?
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's definitely not that urgent, but it's that idea of culling. It's that idea of cutting away some moderately
Yes.
healthy vines so the real healthy vines can like thrive kind of deal.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I love what you said. And I think that maybe I'm biased because I'm in it, but I feel like the 12th house is one of the most powerful thresholds of this whole
Absolutely. I
kind of
agree.
cycle. Yeah. So it's crazy. It's not easy, I will say. I'm also it's what's been like a sneak attack has been the addictions that have come, like my attention to things that I did not know that I was addicted to. And of course,
Absolutely.
they're not harmful, but like sugar, right? Like I have an unhealthy
Yes.
dependency on sugar. Like I need my little sweet treat after dinner. It's like,
Yes, and I think it's important, like, I always remind people to always check for that opposition, so being
mhm,
opposite the 6th house, and it feels like such different energy with you even saying I wanted to say before when you were like, "Sometimes, I had such a hard time associating Pisces with the 12th house." I'm like, "Isn't that so, like, indicative of the 12th house in itself?" Like, just having a hard time understanding or
mhm,
associating certain things and pinpointing
yeah,
certain things, but that's why I think looking toward the 6th house is important, because then it shows what we're doing on a day-to-day basis, what we're called to, what we feel, obligated to do, or, how we're showing up in our day-to-day lives. Like that is contributing to those things that we need to detach from on a psychological or spiritual level. So, like you
mhm,
said, an addiction, it may not always be an addiction to substances, but it could be an addiction to our phones. It could be an addiction to sugar, like you said, the foods that we're eating. And
mhm,
again, those things are sometimes unknowing. We don't always know how much sugar that these companies are putting in the food and fast food and the drinks that we drink,
yeah,
especially. And so being more aware of those things, pinpointing those things in the 6th house are going to help you to break those cycles once you finally do approach the 12th house. So I
yes,
think that each of those chapters is truly like very important in that whole becoming and that whole, and not being hard on ourselves as to why haven't I figured this out yet? Why didn't I know
yes.
better? Because everything is a process.
Yeah, yeah, and the 12th house, you just have to relax into the process. It reminds me of like the energy of trying to grasp air, right? Like if you try to
Yes,
hold it,
yes,
you can't, but air can touch you, air can hit you, air can knock you over, right? But you can't like grasp the air. And I think that's really a 12th house thing of the subconscious. Like you just have to be patient and let it come to you.
yes. I agree. I agree.
Okay, so last four, let's get into the nitty gritty of the first house year. This is arguably the sexiest year of the 30s. This is the one that
Yes, the
everyone's
rebrand year.
right? It's the one that everyone's excited about, right? So when we're talking about first house, we're thinking identity, we're thinking fresh starts, we're thinking big changes, sometimes big changes to your body, big changes to like what you look like, those types of
Absolutely.
things. And so how do you launch into a first house year for someone that is, looking to rebuild, looking to feel more like themselves in their 30s? How do you launch into a first house year with intention versus just starting something new just for the sake of starting something new?
Yeah. I think most importantly, just taking your time and knowing it's that process of rebuilding your identity or rebranding, it's going to take time. Yes, certain changes can take place overnight. You can cut your hair and that can change your perception of yourself. You can, start to dress differently. But say you're on the weight loss journey or a skincare journey even, or you're completely trying to transform other people's perception of you, the public perception of you. That is actually going to take time. And so I think understanding that the first house year does take a lot of dedication to self in that regard and a lot of patience and grace with self as well, because the first house year can feel like we're nitpicking ourselves. I think we're, so consciously aware of those things that we may not necessarily like about ourselves, that we want to change about ourselves. It can be a year of active growth and, transformation, but it also can put a lot of pressure on ourselves. It can also lead to like depression or self-esteem issues because of how much we're focused on self. I think obsessing about yourself or thinking too much about yourself isn't ever going to be healthy for anyone. But that's why I think the first house years are good in the sense of figuring out who you want to be and how important your identity is to how you live your life and how you show up in the world, So what do you want to be known for? How often are you trying to be seen? Are you trying to be in the public eye or do you kind of like to be more behind the scenes? I think that comes up a lot in the first house year, especially because it's right before our second house year. So how we make money, how we seek value in ourselves, how we invest in others. And so how do you wanna be showing up? You know what I mean? What role do you feel that you play in society, in your own personal relationships, in communities? I think all of those things come up in a first house year. So as we enter a first house year, and I said earlier, like rebranding or redefining, I think it's really about asking ourselves, how we wanna show up. I would say that that's the most simple way of putting it. Like, where do I wanna show up? How do I wanna show up? With whom do I wanna show up? How do I want to be seen when I show up? What am I wearing? Like all of those things really mattered. I think even as we go back to like what we're working on, actively working on about ourselves and how that directly impacts how other people are viewing us, it impacts our credibility. If someone sees us actively making progress or, oh, you're looking good. I can see you're really showing up in the gym, that is already a proof of our work ethic and how much we've dedicated to something, And so I always talk about how the first house is that house that is really uninfluenced by anything else, It's being the first house, it doesn't really it's just what people see. It's what we know inherently who we are innate. It's those gifts that when we come out of our mother's womb, we have because we are a part an extension of her, an
Mhm.
extension of our lineage. So, even when it comes to our environments and things like that, I think the first house can also show how those things impact us, how they impact our sense of self, how they impact our ability to change, grow, or transform, our own identity. And so the first house, I feel like it's underrated for it, but can relate to changing your environment or changing again who you relate to, your relationships. There can be breakups that happen in a first house year, friendship breakups, even or endings. You could want to change your career. With me saying rebrand, it can be a complete lifestyle change or identity shift that when I said earlier, like leads to that loss of identity, but it's to recreate that identity and to ultimately become someone new, become someone more refined, that more refined version of yourself.
Yeah. Absolutely, absolutely. And the intentionality, right? Like how you mentioned, showing up, thinking about what are you wearing, how are you feeling? How do you want to what do you want to leave people with when you leave the room kind of energy,
Yes.
and intentionality. I think all of the angular houses, and the first house is an angular house, so first, fourth,
Yes.
seventh, 10th. I think all of the angular houses ask us, I was going to say demand, but we can say demand that we give them some definitions. Right. So the first
Yes.
house is like, who are you? Who do you want people to believe that you are? How do you show up? It's really asking us to define ourselves in this new way. Like, are you the same person you were at 24, at
Yeah.
12? Are you going to be the same person at 48? Right? Like defining the self. And then the fourth house, I think about it asks you to define who's family, what is
Yeah.
home. And then seventh is, what do you want from the people around you?
Yeah.
What do you feel like saying yes to and committing to? And the 10th we just talked about is, what do you want to be known for? Right.
Yeah.
So these like definitions, I think, is so a beautiful way to put it. And you said something that made me chuckle, like that self-obsession, right? Sometimes we can get too caught up in the first house energy and demand, this level of reverence from other people, when
Yeah.
especially I find my Leo clients or my fire sign clients like want this reverence from other people. And life is a team sport. We do need validation from others, right? Validation is a human need. But at the same time, that reverence has to come from us first. And so
Absolutely.
I think that's what the first house is trying to teach you. Are you reverent and devotional to yourself, or do you think
Yeah.
you still have to do something else, right? Do you think you're not
Yes.
blank enough?
There's so much self-acceptance that can be derived from the first house because,
Mhm,
like you said, I do think it brings up how we want to be seen by others, how we wanna be validated by others, what we're hoping for people to, notice about us. But those
mhm,
things need to be validated within ourselves first. How can we really, even accept a compliment or, praise or anything like that if we don't truly feel secure within who we are? And so
absolutely.
that is gonna come up in the first house, and that's why I said it can put a lot of pressure on us in regards to noticing all of those little things that may be off or that, like, we haven't quite figured out yet in terms of who we want to become, because it is about how we wanna be received by others and how we want people to that sense of acceptance and belonging, and so
Mhm,
I think that the first house also reminds us that sometimes you are how you are, and it is a matter of all of your different experiences, but all you can do is be that. You can only, alter so much of you as well. It's also accepting those, like I said, innate qualities about ourselves, the things we can't necessarily control due to, those outer external experiences and our upbringing.
yeah, beautifully put, beautifully put. Okay, so I also think 37, the second house year, is juicy. She's
Oh, yeah.
juicy and she doesn't get her due, right? But you mentioned it a little bit before. At 37, you're in a second house year. This is values, resources, self-worth. And when I say resources, a lot of people, and this burns my biscuits, I will die on this hill, it's not just money. Like, it's
Yes.
not just money. Resources, tangible and intangible. So tangible resources, yes, like money, like luxury items, but also intangible resources, time, attention, energy. Those things are
Absolutely.
all how you allocate those is second house stuff. So how do you use this year to solidify what you've built in that first house and kind of 12th house and on, instead of just trying to prove that you deserve more or accumulate more? Because I think that those are the two traps of the second house year. Spending all the time proving that you're worthy of other people seeing your worth as
It's
opposed
true.
to seeing it yourself, or accumulating so much stuff to prove that you're worthy.
Yeah, yeah, to have that material representation of
Mhm,
I've made it or whatever else, but you
mhm,
still feel empty inside. Yeah, I absolutely think that the second house, I often say the value systems are value systems when I'm talking about the second house, because I really feel that that is what it represents when it comes to the money that is often associated or our assets, with the
mhm,
second house. I think it truly goes back to our value system. So what it is that we value, but also how we can bring value to our own lives and other people's lives as well. So even assets, like you said, it's not just always going to be those physical things. Sometimes our assets can be our awareness, our perception, our wisdom, or, our heart even. And so our empathy. And so certain things, when you look at the second house, those things are going to show you, yes, maybe how you can make money, but also how you bring value to your life. Some people don't even need to make money to have all of the things they need. And that's also being shown in the second house. Sometimes it's about those other resources that you can, to navigate and obtain in order to get your needs met. And so the second house being about our needs met, it is also how we often seek that false sense of security, even how we seek instant gratification at times, even through saying like ordering out instead of cooking our own food, or fast fashion versus going and, purchasing something that might take longer to get to us, or even sewing our own clothes. All of these things to me, especially if you think of like how long astrology has been around, tie back to our own natural resources, how we need to get back to the basics in order to feel more abundant in our life or feel fulfilled in our life. And so I think in modern times, the second house, we get lost in the material, we get lost in capitalistic thinking and how we can have more, more, more. But I don't think the second house is always about accumulation in the physical, like you said. It's sometimes accumulation in our skills, accumulation in our self-worth, and understanding how much we are an asset or a resource in our own. And so that's what I would say about the second house. But yeah, I definitely think it's an opportunity to like get in your bag, physically and literally speaking. I think it's an opportunity to make more money, if of course in this economy, I think we're all trying to do that. And so I do think like modern times right now, present day, it is a great way to tap into also ways to make money without trying so hard. So I think a lot of people are tired of the 9 to 5, and they're tired of like having to show up for these companies or these jobs that don't really bring them fulfillment. So the second house is not only going to show you, well, what fulfills you, what adds value to your life. So is it, I think you said earlier, I'm trying to think of how you put it, but just like the intangible,
Mm.
said something about the
Yep.
intangible, and it made me think of how so many people like work from home now, or they desire to like be able to set their own hours. That is going to be indicative of the second house. What do I like, what do I value and what adds value to my life? A flexible schedule, being able to work from home, being able to like go on a vacation on a random Tuesday. Those things are also second house themes. So how we make our money is, attached to that. And all of that builds our lifestyle, builds our habits, and builds our sense of, I think, like freedom in terms of how we can create more, how we can get our needs met, how we can always feel secure, because security is a common theme of the second house as well. Like, so I think in modern times, the second house is key in liberation, is
Mhm.
key in us all finding ways to make our own money and build a lifestyle that feels true to us and not necessarily like what everyone deems as successful or worthy, or even influencer culture. We can see it like actively shifting from like materialistic to more like, what are your values, what are your skills, what can you contribute? And so that is also a second house theme. It's not just what you have, but what you have to offer as
Yeah,
well.
the collective. Yeah, I love so security. I love how you like I feel like that's the crust at the bottom of the pan. If you boiled the second house all the way down, like
Yes.
that's it. What makes you feel secure? So I love that you brought that up. And I think the other thing I love you brought up, I think that instant gratification has been like a poison for our culture and a poison for what humans actually need, right? Like they're selling us like red light therapy for our face, but there's free red light if you go outside during sunset. It's just they're the things that we don't do anymore, and then they sell it back to us for this gratification for instant gratification. And
Yes.
so I love that you brought that up. And then this is very nerdy of me, but you brought up liberation again, and you brought up liberation for both of the Venus ruled houses, for the seventh and the second.
Wow. Yeah.
And I love that
If you
so
know, you
much.
know.
Right? Right? I love it so, so, so much because you can't have collective liberation without collective value, without a collective value system, without
Yes.
collective and shared care for the people who need it, right? The children, the handicapped, the elderly, the people that just need it. And so to me, that's deeply Venusian, like that devotion to
Yeah.
the other. So I love how that was very
Even
poetic.
how like, Venetian, I think just you bringing that up, it makes me think of, like, how we, take advantage of our own privileges, to give back or but with me saying, like, it's not just what you have, but what you have to give as well. Some people may come from wealth, and then they may, be called to give that back in some way, or, I think the second house is about how you utilize that wealth. Some
Mhm,
people may be more prone to going viral, so then maybe they retweet people's crowd funds more often. That's
mhm.
some way that they can give back or
Yeah.
add value. These are, themes of the second house as well. So again, it's not just about giving money, but it's about giving whatever you have to give, whatever you have in abundance, or again, whatever natural resources that you have due to, again, your own experiences, your lineage, etc.
Yeah, beautiful, beautifully put. Okay, so we're winding down. We got two more houses. At 38, you move into a third house year. And so this is about communication, learning. It's opposite the ninth house, right? Your local environment. So your neighbors, people that are kind of in the environment, you didn't choose for them to be there. So how
Yes.
does this year help you share or help you come more into yourself and really cement down what you've learned throughout this whole rebuilding journey of your 30s?
Yeah, absolutely. Third house years are such mental years. I do think if you're not careful, they can feel very like overwhelming, especially if you do have certain planets there or aspects there, because any like concentration of mental energy can feel a lot. But I think that third house years are great for learning new things and gaining new insights that help you to build your worldview, this like new worldview,
Mhm.
or coming off of the second house when it comes to your value systems or the sense of security you're trying to build, going and seeking out the information that is going to help validate or like confirm, your experiences ultimately and the things that you are trying to attract into your life ultimately. So even the third house being associated with Gemini and me being a Gemini, I know that like with Geminis being so curious, for instance, the third house can relate to our curiosities. It can relate to the things we go out and seek, but also being related to siblings or our cousins or our local environment makes me think of like growing up and being like obsessed with whatever my older brother was doing and like looking back and being like, yep, my music taste and the certain things I was into and how I dress, like certain things come from other people. I think it's like an Oscar Wilde quote, like, I'm a I can't think, like, I'm a reflection of all of the people I've ever met. I can't think of it. Don't quote me on it. It might not be Oscar Wilde at all, but I feel like that is really, a great quote to represent the third house because it is all of those things that we kind of pick up on. I also call it, like, the street smarts house,
Mm.
whereas, like, the ninth house is, like, book smarts, and I feel like they can be flip-flopped, I will say, but I think that it really is about what we learn through simply being whether it's in the right place at the right time or, like, around certain people, like I said, those older siblings, those mentors, people who may know something we don't know or who can just give us more insight or information to whatever we're trying to learn. So that's why I say it is the house of like curiosity. It can be associated with writing and learning in different languages, for instance, and finding different ways to communicate whatever it is you're trying to communicate.
Mm.
Um, so yeah, I think the third house, sorry if I kind of like lost point of your question. But I think going back to like, how can you repeat what you said actually? Just
Yeah,
so I
yeah, I think you did kind of answer it because what I was kind of getting at is how is this helping you learn and share who you are? And you said a couple of things that like jogged my mind of by the time you make it to 38 in the third house year, you're more sure of who you
yeah,
are. You know, your last third house year was at 20, no, we got 27,
20,
27.
yeah,
So you were in the throes of your Saturn return. Life was probably a little topsy-turvy, but you still have questions about your
you're
identity at
questioning a
26.
lot, yeah.
Yeah. And so I feel like at 38, you're like, no, I can explain why I'm this way, right? I can explain
Absolutely.
why my life looks this way. It's almost like the energy of being able to stand up to that nosy aunt at Thanksgiving who's like asking you all these
Yes.
questions about,
Yes. And
why
I
you haven't had kids and why you're not married, and also bringing language to something that used to be a disappointment, right? Like
yes.
I have had some clients that are 38 and 39, and they're at peace with being maybe not married and being a single mom, or maybe being childless but married, or completely single, right? Just being like
Yes.
a dog mom or cat mom. Like they're at peace with how their life looks. And I
Yeah.
think that that's kind of the gift of this third house years. You start to be able to have language for the first time around the
Yeah.
choices that you've made.
And I'd also say it's about like trusting your instincts as well as you start to realize that you picked up this knowledge from this experience and this insight from here, and that all of your experiences have ultimately made you wiser and made you more aware, you know? And so I do think that year is able to like show you 39 is like, I'm confident. I know myself. Like, I
Mhm.
know how to approach this. Those mental processes that are also associated with the third house. I think it's also about like knowing that you're adaptable, knowing that like you can walk into an interview and maybe you don't have to prepare as much as you used to, or you know, when it comes to being able to stand up for yourself or speak to certain things, you're going to feel more confident, you're going to feel more clear. You could even feel more well spoken like as you go through these third house years. Maybe you used to you know, and now you're able to say actually, and so all of those things are going to come up in the third house. And that's why I think it relates to those street smarts, like I said, and relates to like, you know, how you are like that sense of becoming through our environment and what we're susceptible to in our environment. I think that the third house and the ninth house are very underrated. Like, I don't always think people realize how much that it relates to environment. Like, I have my Venus in the third house, and I can tell you like your environment, if you have third house placements, your environment really makes or breaks you. And being a third house placement also constantly reminds you of how the different environments you navigate will impact you and influence you, and how you are more susceptible to things and picking up on things. It's a mutable house, you know, it's related to Gemini. And so it is about that constant exchange of ideas and information, and sometimes also knowing when you don't resonate with something, or when you don't want to entertain something, or you know, when information is not useful ultimately. So
Yes, yes, 100%. I love it so much. So, okay, last but not least, we have the fourth house at age 39. And fourth house energy is the energy of home. It's one of those angular houses that I mentioned earlier. So, what is home, right? What is family? What is your root system made of? And I think my question is, like, as you approach 40, right? You're staring down the barrel of 40, as you have
yeah.
clients that are approaching 40. How does this help them? How is this fourth house year designed to help them create stability and the sense of belonging for what they're going to go through in their 40s? Because you have some big astrological moments happening in your 40s, you know. And so as you're kind of as they're kind of going through their 40s, how does this 39, this fourth house year, really create that root system, that feeling of stability and belonging that they need to be able to go through those things and come out the other side.
Yeah. Well, I first want to mention, like, back with what you said about like in the third house year, you can start to kind of understand, like, maybe I'm okay with being a cat mom, maybe I'm okay with being a dog mom, or not being married, or, you know, cohabitating with my bestie, whatever it might be. I think that the fourth house is a jump off point from those themes. And it kind of goes back to, where do I feel like I belong? You know, where do I want to build? I think especially as we approach, you know, 40, we're getting to that point of most people have either bought a home already, they're trying to buy a home, they have a family that they're actively building. And so it's about like rooting, you know, and like that nesting. And I think of like, even like if you think of the imagery of a bird building a nest and all of the things and how they're taking all of these resources from these different places to like build this strong, unbreakable foundation for their family and themselves. That's what I find is what the fourth house in those more progressive, like adult years is about, you know, post Saturn return, because it's about building something that can't be shaken, building something that can't be broken. And that is not just physically, but also spiritually, and mentally and emotionally and all of the things. And so it's going to pertain to who you're building with, but it's also the fourth house is the lowest point of our chart. So it's very psychological and it's very emotional. And so it is about like those karmic or generational cycles that we need to break or overcome in order to create the life we've always dreamed of, or the relationships, or, to obtain certain even material things we've always dreamed of, because I feel that the fourth house is so fundamental and related to the structures we're building. And so it could be, actual housing, or, buying your first home that could take place in a fourth house year post Saturn. Maybe it's something you've always wanted to do but couldn't quite figure out. Then you finally are able to make it happen, and it's something that lasts. You can be someone who, oh, all throughout your 20s and 30s, you were traveling and you were figuring it out and discovering, and now you've reached this point where you finally know what you want and you're ready to settle down, for instance. Like, I think that that is what that 39 year, like fourth house year, really can bring about for a lot of people.
Mhm.
But on a psychological level, I do think it helps us to finally realize what we have been able to release through all that we've
Mm,
obtained, through all that we've gained, through all that we discovered and explored and experienced. Like, what are we now like releasing in order to make the foundation a little bit stronger, you know what I mean, to sustain even like our future goals, our future hopes and dreams, and like continue to expand ultimately. I always describe the fourth house as like our actual house. And if you think about, if you need to like change the floorboards after so many years, or the piping, or things like that, that is going to come up in our own being, in our own nature. Those things need to be like tinkered with and like checked up on, and they need to get their maintenance, or they're going to eventually kind of implode and create other issues. And so that's the fourth house being the foundational, like, the foundational point in our chart. It's very much can be almost the most important point of our chart for many people. I would say I love all the houses. They're all created equally, but the fourth house being an angular house, being the lowest point of your chart, it really does show like whatever you're building is going to either be making or breaking by how you nurture that fourth house. We can't neglect our, childhood, or where we've come from, or what we experienced as we grew up, or even when we do, we can move away from our family, never speak to them again. We can divorce our husband or move away or whatever it might be, but those things still impact us on a psychological level. They stay with us and they build our worldview. So I think that that's the fourth house. And as we move into our 40s, that is what it's reminding us. We've learned so much, and it's about continuing to solidify your own sense of belonging in the world and what you're building in this world by continuing to dig even deeper, and kind of pay attention to those things that do, feel off, that do feel unstable, that don't make you feel secure in your sense of that belonging that I talked about, or and even what you're trying to build or who you're trying to build with. I think the fourth house can feel so heavy, because I think as we get to those late 30 years, we start to realize how we're even becoming our parents, how we hear that term, like, "Oh, I actually am becoming my parents now, or I'm more like them than I realize." As we go through our Saturn return, we're still realizing that. But then as we reach past our Saturn return, I think that we start to accept how it's inevitable. You know what I mean? That we are going to have some qualities of our parents. And so it's about defining that, defining your sense of family, defining your sense of belonging, like I said, and what you want to build toward if you're going to have children, and all of those things, what family feels like and looks like to you, what emotional safety looks like to you, breaking those generational cycles, like I said, and building like healthier foundations for whatever you're trying to achieve in life.
glorious, so beautiful. And the idea of like fourth house and being in that fourth house here at 39, kind of being okay with creating an alternative family system, right? So
Yeah.
I know some people that are like just they'll say things like it ends with me, right? So they are content with ending their family line with themselves because it has been so hurtful and so harmful to so many members of the family. And so they're like, it's done, you know? And I think that's so beautiful and that's so courageous. but also at the same time, it's courageous to have a child in this world, right? That
Yeah,
feels really, it almost feels like the walls are closing in sometimes with the news and the things that are going on. And to have a child and say, no, I believe in the future. I believe that this person
yes,
can be one additional person to, you know, help change things and create a world. I want to create a world that they want to live in the alter, like you were saying, no contact, right? So there are people that have gone no contact with their families and they've
yeah,
created families, but they're doing things totally different. And they've gone no contact with maybe their abusers or people who did not protect them. So there's just
exactly.
the fourth house year. I think I love how you put it, of creating these different structures and these different family systems that fit you and that feel like home to you. And that saying, if you don't, you know, looking at other people and saying, if you don't like it, get out of here. Like it's
Yeah.
not your business, And I think that's why the first house work is so important, and then setting the value system in the second house, and then being able to communicate that to someone else so that you can create this system and network and web of people in the fourth house. So that is so beautiful. And
And
also
if
love
I
what you.
could add
Yeah.
one last thing I was just gonna say, because it made me think about it, but I feel that the fourth house can also, with you saying that it relates to like, oh my goodness, I kind of lost my point because I was trying to like get it out. But just like what I wanted to say is that fourth house can also relate to planting seeds. So when you were, oh, okay, when you were discussing the concept of a child? Why can't I think of exactly what you were saying? But it makes me think of when you have children or when you're starting your own family. That's kind of what you're talking about. Those alternate family systems. And
Mhm.
even if you do choose to have a traditional family, but it also makes me think of like how having a child is representative by an actual seed, but then how bringing a child into this world, nurturing a child that may not be your own, nurturing something that may not even be a child but could be another entity that can support people. And that's why I say that the fourth house is those actual structures. It's your actual house, your living quarters where you can seek safety or a safe place, because it is about planting those seeds that are also going to touch and reach other people as well, or exist for generations after you, with me saying it can relate to our generational patterns. I love that often people, because you said a lot of people will say it ends here with me. I also often hear when people say, I'm not breaking generational cycles, I'm creating new ones. And so I
Mhm.
think that's what it also is about. And so that's why I just wanted to mention, I think that the fourth house is also about planting seeds, because it is what we're trying to, the foundations we're trying to build, so that when we do build to our 10th house and the things we're leaving behind, it impacts other people. And it's something that other people can build off of as well,
Yeah.
whether it be our children or whoever.
Yeah, and I do want to caveat here for anyone watching. We're not to poo-poo on traditional families, right? If you have a traditional family, that's beautiful and glorious. They're just so exceedingly rare because I feel like capitalism has broken so many of us and so many of our ancestors that it's
Exactly.
just like, it's a little bit difficult in today's world to have that traditional family for a bunch of reasons, right? And so I just wanted to say that. I didn't want to offend anybody. We're highlighting all of the different ways that families can fall on the spectrum of the fourth house. So, yes. So my last question here, what would be the advice that you would give someone who wants to use their perfection years strategically in their 30s, wherever they are in the cycle of their 30s, right? They want to get out of survival mode and they want to use these energies to start thriving and to start feeling at home on this earth, in their bodies and in their life.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say, one, take your time to really just get familiar with your own houses. Because as we talk about all of these different themes, of course, they're going to be general to whatever profection year you're in. But the true, like, heart of each profection year you deal with is going to be completely related to that Time Lord that we spoke about earlier. And so, knowing the sign and the planet that rules over each of these houses for you in your natal chart is going to personalize those profection years, and they're going to help you to dive even deeper and to understand, okay, my this profection year is ruled by Mars, so it's about action for me, whereas this year may be ruled by Venus, so more so about harmony or more so about my relationships. And so I think that as you truly like personalize and study your chart, and those profection years within your development, it's really going to help you to understand where you're at. Because I think that awareness is key. Like, that's what I emphasize with my clients and everything. I also just deeply encourage people, like, I don't wanna see you in 5 years. I really need you to figure it out, and not in a dismissive way, but in a way that I want everyone to be more self-aware. I want you to be able to pinpoint a pattern before it even comes up, and I think that the best way to do that is to become more familiar with yourself. And so studying the nature of the planet, studying what missions that they're calling us on and what they want us to embody in our lives and how they want us to show up is really going to help you to then understand what each profection year is really gifting you, because I do think profection years are a gift. I do think it's an opportunity to find or unlock or unleash something, to seek out new insight or information or even a new way of being. And like, not always rely on those old ways, those old things that we used to do, those subconscious, reactions and things of that nature. So I just think that moving into, especially for those, if anyone's watching and they haven't even reached their 30s yet and they're still in their Saturn return, for instance, the 30 perfection years are truly breaking. And of course, I'm still at the beginning, but just knowing, like, through clients and other people that I have observed how groundbreaking they are. I think your 20s are so, you're still figuring it out. You're still trying to find yourself. The 30s are integration. The 30s are truly bringing it all into practice. And so it can bring a lot of momentum, and a lot of positive progress. So I think that as long as you're aware, as long as you're accountable, and as long as you are like showing up in these perfection years, you're going to see like so much change. You're going to look back 10 years later and be like, wow, like, who is that person? Who is that girl? So, yeah, I hope that answers the question, but I do encourage everyone to use profection years. I speak about them a lot in my own like readings and on social media. And I just think that for anyone who's like type A a little bit and like wants to know why and how and just get those specifics, profection years are like the perfect tool.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Ashani. I appreciate you being here. Where can everyone find you if they want to work with you further?
Yes, okay, so my website is just ashanithealchemist.com, and then most of my social media platforms, I'm on YouTube, I'm on X, I'm on Instagram and TikTok, and they're all at Ashaniism, so ASHANISM at the end, or Ashani the Alchemist, and so that's where you're gonna find any reels, any, like, zodiac sign readings, collective messages, horoscopes, and all that good stuff. I also like to post about like the transits and things that are going on throughout the months. So, yeah.
Lovely. Okay. Well, thank you so much. I will see everyone in the next recording. And
Yes. Thank
yeah,
you so
thank you.
much.
Bye.